Welcome to the Nuclear Investing Podcast, where we talk about ways to invest in the nuclear renaissance that's happening in the United States and around the world. I'm your host, Brennan Moore. I'm here in Austin, Texas, in front of the beautiful Capitol building, kicking off the Texas Nuclear Alliance Summit this week. We're fortunate to have Reed Clay, the founder and president of the Texas Nuclear Alliance. Reed and I talk about what's happening in the state of Texas and outside of Texas, both in the SMR space and the fuel space, and talk about nuclear waste. I hope you enjoy the conversation today. Reed, welcome to the Nuclear Investing Podcast. Excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Brennan.
Yeah, let's jump right in. So you're the president and founder of the Texas Nuclear Alliance. You guys have said your mission is to make Texas the nuclear capital of the world. Tell us a little bit about the Alliance, your members, and also the summit that you're hosting here this week.
Yeah, sure. So, we began with a pretty simple idea about 3 or 4 years ago that, Texas needed nuclear. Obviously, ERCOT has had its share of energy scarcity over the last, decade or so. Uri is the punctuation point on that. We kind of, the thought was originally in the aftermath of Uri, and really kind of the realization that nuclear had not been a big part of our energy mix for a couple decades, and so we realized that Texas needed nuclear, and we also thought that the Texas industrial spirit and entrepreneurial spirit really had something to offer to the nuclear industry, which had become, really bogged down in bureaucracy, frankly. And so we started that with that idea. We have grown to almost 70 plus members now. We run the gamut in terms of the industry, from new technology developers to traditional utilities, to university systems, and to all the sort of service providers that go around that. And so, today's marks the start of our second annual Texas Nuclear Summit. Last year we had close to 400 people gather here in Austin to talk about nuclear and how Texas could make nuclear a reality again. Today we're convening close to 700 people, so we've grown by 75% or so in terms of attendees, and the amount of excitement is really amazing and really humbling, to be honest, when I look back at just 2 years ago where we were when the Alliance was just me. So, I think that's a testament to, the leadership in this state really being bought in on nuclear. The governor in the state of the state in February said, we're going to make Texas the leader in the nuclear renaissance. And then he and the Texas legislature really delivered last legislative session, which wrapped up in May, by investing close to $500 million directly into the nuclear industry. And so I think that excitement is really palpable here as we convene the second annual Texas Nuclear Summit.
Well, the trajectory is really strong, and I heard the summit is sold out, so congratulations.
It is, yeah.
It's exciting.
No more dinners left.
Yeah, it's a euphoric time to be in the space, so you were certainly out in front of that, and congratulations on building out an incredible organization.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about Texas, just framing Texas. We're here with the beautiful Capitol building behind us. Give me a little bit of a sense of how Texas compares to other states, just from an energy production standpoint, talking about nuclear, oil and gas, solar, wind, all the energy production in Texas. Help us frame Texas specifically.
Yeah, for a long time, I think we boasted about being the oil and gas capital of the world, and I think that's still true. But I think you've seen that mantra really change to the energy capital of the world, and that's because Texas has become the leader in wind production. If they're not the leader yet, they're close to the leader in solar and battery deployment. And the one thing missing from that is the one reason why we're talking about making Texas the nuclear capital of the world is nuclear. And so, we've been real good about the all above strategy, except for nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
If you and frankly, if you look at the net new generation in ERCOT over the last 10 years, most of that is wind and solar, and particularly wind. Solar is more recent. That to me has presented a lot of friction in the marketplace in terms of spiking prices and reliability issues, which offers an incredible opportunity for nuclear. And I think, really we're on the way with what has been done in the legislature, what the governor's vision and leadership, to being the nuclear capital of the world as well.
It's exciting.
It is.
And then for other states looking to Texas for what playbook works, Texas has been a leader in the oil and gas space, and part of that has to do with geology, just being blessed with geology, and a lot of it has to do with having the right regulatory framework in place and the ownership of surface and mineral rights and just the entrepreneurial culture here.
Yep.
So what can other states take from Texas' playbook when it comes to nuclear deployment?
Yeah, I think, Nick, nuclear really suffers from a will problem more than anything else. And I think what Texas is bringing to bear on that conversation is a will to build, a will to power through what have been traditional obstacles to the industry. Frankly, obstacles that not sure they were mostly perceived really more than real. And so a lot of the things that have benefited the oil and gas industry are things that will benefit nuclear. I mean, we have a regulatory environment. We do regulate things. We want to make sure the environment is protected. We want to make sure we're conserving our water resources, our air resources. But the regulatory environment is certain and predictable. And it's also efficient. Like when you come to do a project in Texas, you know what the process is going to be and you move through it efficiently. I don't think there's any question that nuclear in particular is going to be a big beneficiary of that. I think the other thing Texas has got going for it that can't necessarily be replicated is nuclear. The demand signals for nuclear right now for any energy are huge in Texas because of the Texas miracle, both the population growth, but frankly, the industry growth. Businesses are flocking here. AI, Samsung, chip manufacturers, SpaceX, Starlink, and of course the large industrial complex on our coast continues to grow. That all needs power. And that demand center and demand signal is a big reason why I think Texas is really well positioned to be a leader on new nuclear, and not necessarily something that can be replicated. But I do think, what nuclear has lacked first and foremost is a will, and we have a leadership in this Texas with Governor Abbott and others who have decided that we're going to be a leader on nuclear. And just that will alone is going to be something that can be replicated, and we're seeing it be replicated. I mean, I think some of the successes that we have been able to achieve here in the last, really 12 to 18 months have really put a focus and eyes on what we're doing in Texas, and we get outreach from, South Carolina to New Mexico to, to Nevada to, you name the state, about wanting to understand what our playbook is, how we did it, and how they can replicate it in their own state. And that, frankly, was when we started the alliance, one of our, sort of soft measures of success was, would we see other groups like ours start to pop up around the United States and come to us and say, how did you do what you did, and will you help us do it in our state?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Will, and a little bit of capital.
And a little bit. Look, I mean, the fiscal situation in Texas is remarkable as an understatement. I mean, it's one that has been carefully curated by the leadership in the building behind us. They, with all the COVID money, they still continue to run a fiscally responsible budget, and that has resulted in significant budget surpluses, larger than most states' budget over the last two budget cycles. And the leadership, starting with Governor Abbott, decided to make some very strategic investments in infrastructure and in investing in new industries, not new industries, but industries that needed the capital infusion to make sure that Texas was going to be a leader in those industries. So they made huge investments in chips. They made huge investments in space exploration, and now most recently the nuclear industry has gotten close to $500 million in investment, and that's really going to position the Texas miracle to continue for the next generation.
Which is critical, and it's something that we want to spend a lot of time talking about on the show, is what opportunities exist to invest in the space and better understanding what's technology versus what's early stage deployment and what's late stage deployment. What does that look like? So I want to talk a little bit about deployment, and I would love to spend a little bit of time talking about the Permian Basin, which I'm sure comes up a lot in your conversations. Near and dear to my heart, I spent over 10 years of my career in the oil and gas space, half of which was with an operator out in the Permian Basin. A lot of my network is out there. A lot of guys asking the questions of how is nuclear going to be deployed. So first of all, just curious to know how often the Permian Basin specifically comes up in your conversations about nuclear.
It's if you'd asked me 2 years ago, do the two have anything to do with each other? I might have told you no. But the connection between them, happens at multiple levels, and the conversations around the Permian are, near constant with respect to nuclear. I think there's a couple different touch points. I mean, I think first and foremost, the Permian needs a lot of power. 17 gigs to electrify the Permian and pull them off of diesel generators. When you talk about that amount of power, it becomes a difficult infrastructure problem out there. As you know, it is a very big area, very expensive to run infrastructure when you're talking about power lines and transmission lines. And, nuclear offers an opportunity potentially through micro reactors to actually come in and solve not just the power problem, but the infrastructure problem that is running behind the power problem. So there's a connection there. There's a connection on a grid level in the sense that we are on a path, maybe I don't say overcorrecting. We are correcting what I mentioned earlier, which is that we've primarily built wind and solar over the last 10 years, and there's a big emphasis on reliable natural gas generation. That's great. I'm all for that. I'm a proud Texan. If you're a Texan, you love the Permian Basin and you love oil and gas, and that's part of our DNA, and it always will be. But when you look at grid management, natural gas is an extremely reliable, great use of the natural resources that you talked about earlier that we have in West Texas. But natural gas, we are taking for granted right now that we have had low, stable natural gas prices over the last 20 years. We don't have to go back that far to remember, 2005, 2006, 2007, when natural gas was, over $13. If we build a grid that's 60 to 70% natural gas, you can quickly see the impact that, a slight change in natural gas prices will have on power consumers in the state of Texas. And so there's another nexus between oil and gas at the grid level, in the sense that not backfilling, but building a grid that is a great combination of natural gas and nuclear has the ability to diversify, sort of the fuel source and create some stability in the pricing of energy for consumers. And then I think there, maybe most importantly, is the attitude that the oil and gas industry has, and the impact it can potentially have on nuclear. I think one of the things that nuclear has really suffered from is a perception of problems, a sort of a paralysis by analysis. And this, the oil and gas industry isn't paralyzed. These are people who are, they're visionaries, but they're actors, they're builders, right? And that mentality is something that I think the oil and gas or the nuclear industry really needs. Is like, we need to build, we need to power through these obstacles. And I think that ethos, that mentality is something that is sort of hardwired into the oil and gas industry's DNA, and it's something that we as Texans, and we're so close to that, and almost by osmosis have some of it ourselves, we can bring that to bear on the nuclear problem as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've thought this for a while, and I continue to think that oil and gas companies and oil and gas investors should be some of the closest allies to the nuclear renaissance, because from a company standpoint, I mean, as you alluded to, oil and gas is one of the most innovative industries in the world. And there's a strong use case, not so much competition, a really strong use case for helping to power their operations.
Absolutely.
And then from an investor standpoint, very few investors in the world have the risk appetite of oil and gas investors. And the pain that is endured through not knowing not only how much production is going to come out of the ground every time you spend $10 million on a shale well, but what price you're going to be able to sell that production at.
Right.
Very few industries in the world have unknown variables of production and price. And we've gotten better and better at honing in on the production piece, but still, I mean, oil prices are a mystery any day. So it's interesting. I think there's some misconceptions around the use cases of micro reactors first, modular reactors, first portable reactors. And I think some of these micro reactors are, at least they plan on being portable, the viability of that to be determined. I think a lot of people believe that modular means portable.
Right.
And so one of the use cases you hear of people at least believe is going to happen is that we're going to be powering all the frac operations in the Permian Basin with small modular reactors. And after the frac's complete, you're going to move your reactor to the next one. And I don't believe that to be true based on my conversations, but I think both from a manufacturing and a power standpoint, there's a lot of interesting opportunities out in the Permian Basin, and it should certainly be a playground and one of the core focus areas of nuclear deployment across the country. So curious if there's any other use cases that you've come across or hearing about in the Permian Basin, or if we pretty well covered those.
No, you did. You covered them well, yeah.
So on the nuclear side, I want to pivot actually a little bit to the surface ownership side, which again is something that not a lot of people think about and talk about, but from the oil and gas side, it's embedded in our DNA. So there's a lot happening on the data center front. There's a lot to happen on the nuclear reactor front. And typically nuclear alongside wind and solar and other renewables suffers from a NIMBYism problem.
Right.
No one wants it in their backyard, NIMBY being not in my backyard. And in this case, there's conversations that we've had with people that would like to have it in their backyard. They would be open to having it in their backyard. So I'd like to take the opposite side of the NIMBY problem and say, what if someone's open to having nuclear deployed? What if they have thousands of acres of surface ownership and they're open to that? What kind of commercial opportunities do you think exist there? And what's a way that they can be thinking about a mutually beneficial relationship between themselves and the data center companies and the nuclear companies?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that's, this is Texas and, we love freedom. And if you own thousands or even tens of thousands of acres, you can, and you want nuclear, you can deploy it there. And I think by and large, that's true. One of the things I've been, pretty consistent on is that I think, the anti-nuclear crowd has gone not missing. They've just been dormant because we just really haven't been building any. And so I think, as good as this state has been on dealing with NIMBYism, even sort of what I would call as faux NIMBYism or manufactured NIMBYism, I think that is a problem that, we'll have to deal with. And I think it'll take, the form. It's interesting you're talking about surface, rights. And, I think one interesting area, and if you read closely some of these articles about some of the new projects that are being announced, it's a little bit in the background, but I think as these things get closer to reality, it will become one of the levers that the NIMBYism and probably more likely the sort of faux NIMBYisms will use, which is, water and the impact it could potentially have on groundwater. Yeah, it's already a big issue, separate and apart from nuclear in our state right now. And that's something that I think we're really attuned to, is dealing with these potential levers and building infrastructure in place that if you do have tens of thousands of acres or even 1,000 acres and you want to bring nuclear to your site and you want to have a data center there, that you can do it, because I do think as well as we've dealt with an NIMBYism, you still see signs of it. You can look at LNG facilities in South Texas. They've got a group that popped up called the Save RGV that is really designed to do nothing more than be a thorn in the side of the LNG project and SpaceX in South Texas. And you see that sort of up and down the coast with respect to new projects, and you see some of it in the Permian Basin. And I think that is anywhere nuclear goes, and I don't think it's specific to nuclear. Anytime we're going to have a big major project, whether it's oil and gas or nuclear, it is an issue that we'll have to deal with. But I think Texas has traditionally dealt with that well. I think we've, like I said, we go back to that predictable, certain regulatory framework, and we have that framework and we operate within it. And typically, investors know what they can expect with respect to that. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly head on.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, energy density matters.
Yeah.
And from an NIMBY standpoint, I had a conversation recently, and I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's directionally correct, about a gigawatt size solar backed data center project of solar panels and batteries. And it was they were going to deploy solar panels across almost 10,000 acres of surface to power 1 gigawatt data center.
Yep.
And so if you scale that down, and again, I don't know the exact size either, it depends on the reactor design and technology, but you could say 50 to 100 acres for a gigawatt size nuclear power plant versus 8, 9, 10,000 acres. So power density certainly matters. And one of the arguments, one of the counters to that is, well, what about waste?
Yep.
There's no waste coming, no direct waste coming out of solar panels and wind turbines. And so I want to talk a little bit about waste, and it's a bit of a provocative point, but I actually
shouldn't be, but it is.
It shouldn't be. And I believe that the state or states that embrace waste and welcome waste and find the best solution for it will actually be the leaders on the deployment side. What are your thoughts there?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. The one thing I would say, just as an umbrella comment to answering the question about waste is, the environmental bona fides of nuclear are really unassailable. And, I think it depends a little bit on what you focus on when you compare it to other energy sources, but you mentioned one, which is the energy density and the potential environmental impact that solar and wind have in a way that nuclear really doesn't because of the energy density of nuclear. But frankly, you also have to look at the whole supply chain of these other energy sources. When you talk about, the lithium supply chain for solar, the waste from solar, we tend to not focus on those when we talk about the environmental bona fides of solar, but those are real environmental impacts, and they may not happen right in our backyard, but they're still happening. And I think waste is a really, really good sort of microcosm of that, a little bit of a double standard in terms of, environmental bona fides. We tend to focus on nuclear waste like it is somehow a bigger problem than other types of industrial waste. The reality is it's not. It is the most highly regulated form of waste that there is. There's not a lot of it. You hear different analogies. One's a Walmart, another's a football field, 6 or 8 stories high. But the reality is it's not a lot of waste. It could all fit in a very small place, somewhere in our very large country. And I think, there's a bigger issue here, which is it really waste? A lot of this waste is stuff that could be recycled and reused and turned into fuel. And, you see lots of conversations about that beginning to take place around the country as a potential solution. We've been focused on deep isolation. The reality is a lot of that waste we could probably repurpose and turn into fuel. And, that would be, a great use of what has become a stagnant problem in terms of storing this waste on site at generators across the country. In terms of the state that embraces waste being a leader, I think that's true for a couple different reasons. One is the practicality of it, right? These things will generate low-level waste, it will generate high-level waste, and the ability to, operate your facility and then have a convenient solution for your waste is going to be a factor in terms of where we build both manufacturing and new reactors. But I think there's another more fundamental piece here, which is that waste has been this big supposed issue for the industry for a long time, and it certainly has been a political issue for a long time, that I think the state figures out that this really isn't a problem and that there's actually an opportunity here, is going to send a signal to the industry that we get you. We understand nuclear in a way that no other state does, and we have moved past what Greenpeace and Sierra Club and many of these organizations have been telling us for 3 to 4 decades. It will send an incredibly powerful signal that we understand nuclear, we understand the industry, and we want you here. So in some ways it's symbolic as well, but it's more than symbolic. This is a real phenomenon. If you look at a recent op-ed from Radiant Energy about their decision to take their project to Tennessee and not stay in Wyoming, it had everything to do with the politics around waste. They were concerned about what the NIMBYism and anti-waste perspective in Wyoming would mean for their business. And just because of that one issue, they decided to move their project to a different state. And so this isn't hypothetical. This is real. The waste issue has been an unfortunate distraction and really obstacle to building. And I think the state and the leaders that decide to move past that are the ones that are going to send not only a very powerful signal, but they will also scoop up a very valuable, growing part of the industry, which in terms of how you deal with the waste, how you store it, and also how you reprocess it and reuse it.
There's a massive opportunity there.
Huge.
At the political level and even from an investment standpoint. I mean, if you think about waste, when you think about investing in nuclear, most people's minds probably don't go straight to waste. But there's a huge opportunity set around solving that problem. And you're right, it's going to be political at the state level, it's going to be political at the federal level, and it's going to be a big topic for investors as well. And certainly don't want to have waste being generated in one state and then having to go through federal regulations to move it across states somewhere else. So it's an interesting topic. And another hot one is uranium in general, the supply of uranium, the extraction of uranium. We could talk about this for a long time.
Yes.
But I'd like to spend just a minute on it, really, in two facets. One,
I'll try to keep it to a minute.
We'll spend a few. I want to talk a little bit about extraction, and I want to talk a little bit about conversion and enrichment, all in the context of Texas. So Texas has a history in resource extraction. And so talk to me a little bit about uranium extraction, conversations that are being had here. I know there's even some ideas around uranium extraction from seawater, which aren't new ideas. They just haven't proven to be commercial ideas historically. There's in situ extraction. There's other forms. So talk to me a little bit about what you think the role of Texas will be on the uranium extraction side.
Well, a couple things. First, as you know, we have great uranium deposits here in South Texas that really run from the border with Mexico up to Victoria, and we ought to be utilizing. I mean, obviously, to me, the uranium discussion and the fuel supply discussion bleeds very quickly into a national security and energy security discussion. When you think about how dependent we are on Russian uranium, we have that resource here, as you mentioned, and we were talking about a minute ago. Mineral extraction is something we're very good at, and we ought to get very good at uranium extraction as well, given that we have the resources and given that we do have this potential fuel supply issue, national security issue, sort of staring us in the face. We did pass a couple bills last session that were aimed at kind of streamlining the permitting process for uranium extraction. And that's something that we will continue to focus on. We talked about the NIMBYism issue a minute ago. I think that is another area where the faux NIMBYism will focus. I mean, it's a very convenient choke point. Waste, fuel supply, uranium extraction is a nice way, if you don't like nuclear, to have an impact. And then you get to the enrichment side. I mean, it's very clear from, the executive orders that the Trump administration put down in May that, and really ever since the Advance Act was passed, that this country's got a lot of work to do with respect to onshoring uranium enrichment. And, Texas is a manufacturer state, and, there's no reason why we should not be a leader in terms of, we have some of the raw feedstock in terms of the actual yellow cake, and we also have the, experience in manufacturing and in extraction to really be a leader in terms of onshoring and reestablishing the United States as, a nuclear leader, which cannot be done if we are not also a leader in the fuel supply.
Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to have more of just a turnkey. We do everything here.
Yeah,
we handle everything.
We've got a strategic petroleum reserve here. There's no reason why we shouldn't have a strategic uranium reserve here.
Exactly. It's another really interesting topic. I'd love to spend a lot more time on it. I want to pivot now to talk more about capital markets and the investment opportunities in the space. And this is a big part of our focus, is identifying what investment opportunities exist. And really in the early days of me looking into how do I get exposure to what's happening in the nuclear space, it didn't take me long to realize that there weren't a lot of great options to get direct exposure. So I came across a tweet, someone sent it to me a few weeks ago, and I found it really informative and helpful. And we'll pull it up here and look at it and reference it a little bit. And what it really helps to establish is just a framework for who are the players, what are the categories, If someone has no idea what opportunities there are in nuclear, but they know they want to invest in small modular reactors, this at least gives a list of and a framework for how they can think about it. So there's some ETFs in the space. There's some names here we can talk about. I'm not on here to talk about picking stocks.
Yeah.
We're much more focused on deployment and actually getting reactors producing electricity. But I do think this will be helpful to go through, and I'll talk through this a little bit, and then I want to follow up with a few questions around where Texas is leading on this front and maybe where some opportunities exist, and then where you personally might have interest as well. So I'll talk through this list. We'll just scroll through. We have the small modular micro reactors, which arguably are the hottest topic. Mm-hmm. And then we have the uranium enrichers and the nuclear fuel technology. Fewer options here, fewer companies. There's some interesting opportunities going on there in the private space right now, but I think just in general, you could say conversion and enrichment are underallocated from a resource, knowledge, capital standpoint.
And for the reasons we just talked about, potentially massive opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly. And what we don't have on here directly is the waste side, which is also a huge opportunity set. I want to add too, on the SMR side, there's a lot of these companies are raising in the private markets right now. The DOE pilot program has set out this race to try to get a reactor going critical by that date. And so there's a lot of capital being quickly raised in the private markets and the public markets. Terrestrial Energy, it looks like, is about to finish their de-SPAC process, and that deal is going to close. And so on the other list, the other one on the list of SMR companies here would be Terrestrial. Currently, it's under HOND as the ticker. I think it will soon convert once they close that deal. So this gives an idea of the opportunities in the space: services and equipment, power producers, uranium producers, developers, and then you have the ETFs. I'll make a brief note on the power producer side. One of my early findings is, I want to invest in nuclear. I came across Constellation and Vistra. Mm-hmm. And though they operate nuclear power plants, it's really one of the furthest ways you can get direct exposure to nuclear technology. So again, just trying to help people frame and understand this. A lot of the ETFs are good set it and forget it opportunities to just get exposure to the space. What I've found is tends to be an overweight to the power producers mm-hmm. and to the miners.
Yeah.
And again, there's just not enough options in the public arena on the SMR side yet. I think in the coming 12, 18 months, a lot of these guys will be going public through various forms, whether it's a traditional IPO or a SPAC or an APO. So we can click into this and just see, no specific data points here other than just the market's done really well in this space. There is a tremendous appetite from institutional investors, from individual investors like you and me. And so again, a big part of the goal here really with the show is let's try to start getting people educated on the opportunity set, both on the public side and on the private side. So that's the framing here. And what I want to get your thoughts on, just jumping back to the categories, is what areas do you think of all these categories that we talked through that Texas is leading on right now? Which area do you think is the strongest for Texas?
Oh man, that's a tough question. When I look at this list, part of me thinks that one area that Texas is supporting, even if these companies aren't all necessarily based here, is the commercialization of SMRs. I think there are a lot of opportunities that are, look at Texas A&M's RELIS program and the test bed that they're creating, hopefully allowing for early commercialization of first-of-a-kind reactors and, really allowing a space for some of these, young companies to prove out their business models. So I think, we're leading in that regard. I think, again, I one of the biggest opportunities I see really is the fuel supply. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have uranium miners in Texas, I think both of the major players are publicly traded. I think that's a huge area of, potential expansion. I know that they're going to have political support and, and again, we talked about the mineral extraction capabilities in this state. I think we'll excel at that. But I also think, what I hear a lot in terms of, both enrichment and reprocessing is a desire to look at Texas. I think the question is, can we send a signal that we're open for that type of business, because, this is a great place to do business, as we talked about at the outset. Regulatory environment, low taxes, plentiful real estate, and again, a workforce that is, used to, building things. And, and we're a state that's used to building a workforce for specific industries. And so I think that's another huge opportunity for the state of Texas. I also think that, potentially, the merchant utilities, Vistra and Constellation, have potentially huge opportunities here. We have two, major sites for, either small modular reactors or large scale reactors at Comanche Peak and South Texas Project. Both of those have two large reactors each. Both were planned to have four. So, we have two beautiful sites that have, the capability to deploy, reactors, and I think deploy them relatively quickly, because the sites have been vetted. They've actually gone through the NRC process for the other, to build out the other half of both of those sites. The water and infrastructure is in place. And so I think those are potential opportunities. Large scale isn't the most talked about, because of Vogtle 3 and 4, I think, isn't the most talked about opportunity. But, if the Trump administration is serious about 400 gigs by 2050 and, 10 large scale reactors under construction by 2030, I think Texas and, our, major utilities, which are, again, Vistra and Constellation, have an opportunity there. Those are really two great sites that are, really, to me, shovel ready. So.
Yeah, not a lot of
your
talk.
Question?
Not a lot of talk around the large scale side. If you listen to the messaging from the loan programs office, that is the only deployed, proven technology we have right now. And so it's another area where Texas can be proud to have probably the biggest project announced with the Fermi project in connection with Texas Tech, and they have huge ambitions there, and it will be interesting to see how that unfolds. But it's, I believe, a dozen or so is the long-term plan of AP 1000 deployment. And so that's also a good use case of trying to use all the tools. Yes. Which is the big takeaway, is it's not a binary outcome. It's all, we need all the tools. We need all the gas we can get. We need all the nuclear we can get. And we need the support of all the existing infrastructure we have of solar and wind and batteries. So
absolutely.
It's an interesting time. I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you put your entrepreneur hat on for a minute and just jumping back to the categories and what we've talked about from an opportunity set. If you were to step away from your role right now and go start a company in the nuclear space, which one of those areas do you think that you would be trying to tackle and be focused on?
Fuel supply.
Fuel supply.
Yeah. Reprocessing or enrichment. Although, there's several, big, great incumbents in the enrichment space. So I'm not sure starting a company from scratch makes sense, but yeah, I think those are, when I look at Texas Spirit and I look at some of the biggest problems that need to be solved, I think it's, taking what we have called waste and what we have pretended has been a problem, and building a company that's going to put that to use. And I frankly, based upon some of the recent conversations with the federal government, I think there's some appetite to potentially, partner with them on that. So I think I would say fuel supply.
I think that's a good idea. Let's talk about the universities now. It's again, another area where Texas has really stepped up and was early. So you have the partnerships with the Texas A&M Rellis campus. You have Abilene Christian and their partnership with Natura. You have UT Austin, Texas Tech. All the major universities here stepping up.
Yeah.
Why was Texas early here, and how has that really helped set a precedent and a model for partnership with the universities?
Yeah, I think the same reason that our legislature and governor were early in terms of, stepping up to be leaders in nuclear and wanting to lead the nuclear renaissance. It's a Texas spirit of, building and ingenuity. And I think, we've had some leadership at, our universities, understand the importance of AI to, and wanting to be leaders in AI, and then what that means from an energy consumption standpoint. And, that really nuclear is, a really great candidate to support, AI goals. And I think, I don't want to single anybody out, or more importantly, I don't want to leave anybody out, because I love all the universities you just mentioned. But, I think both of the projects that A&M and Tech, so the Rellis campus, energy test bed on the one hand, and the Fermi America project with Tech on the other, those are built on this country's desire to win the AI race, and to be leaders in AI. I think, leadership in this state, including the leadership at those two universities, understand both the opportunity and frankly, the existential issues if we are not leaders on AI, not just from a, state perspective, although I do think that's part of it. I think they understand that Texas's competitive advantages, we have a lot of them. We talked about them at the outset. But, AI is going to change everything. And if we want to continue to be, sort of, the seventh largest economy in the world, and, frankly, I think everybody's envy is, Texas. I think AI, being a leader and stepping up in AI and doing it in a big way, is really important for the state. I think the leadership at both those universities know that. And, nuclear is a logical consequence of that, in my opinion. And, I think the leadership there realizes that they can, almost kill two birds with one stone, in the sense that, if they invest in nuclear, if they become leaders in nuclear energy generation, they will also be the home for AI going forward. And so the investment in nuclear is a double win in that sense.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunities on the workforce side too.
Absolutely.
I think where the universities, they've stepped it up, and they also need to continue to step up, and other universities need to step up, because there needs to be dedicated programs, not just for nuclear physicists and engineers, but you saw several of the universities created land programs, for example, for the oil and gas industry around the shale boom.
Right.
Some of the best paying jobs out of college for the last 20 years have been in that category. And I have some family right now that are going into college, coming out of college, a few years out of college, or even 15, 20 years into their career. And I've been telling people, get into nuclear energy. Because it's when I was coming out of college, it felt like it was a little bit late into the shale revolution, and I was working in the oil and gas space. And in hindsight, it was so early.
Yeah,
it was still so early, and we are in, I think,
way earlier,
in the very, very early innings.
Right.
We are Mitchell Petroleum and others experimenting with fracking way before the fracking. It's still the very early days.
Yeah, and I think on the workforce issue, just real quick. I mean, I didn't mean to give that short shrift in my initial answer. I mean, I think there's no question that those universities and the leadership in the state understand the competitive advantage that having a nuclear workforce, gives us in terms of, really bringing both the manufacturing, and, the deployment and therefore operations of new nuclear power. We passed a bill that is designed to do exactly what you're talking about eventually, which is it's bringing together the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the community colleges and the Texas Workforce Commission to put together a strategic plan about how we can, create the programs that you were talking about, the analog to the programs that you were talking about with respect to oil and gas. And that's going to be true from the degree programs, to your point, that, Texas A&M, UT, Texas Tech, Abilene Christian, will standardize those degree programs, will establish those, give those universities, a huge leg up in terms of educating the next generation of nuclear engineers, et cetera. But it's also utilizing the incredible community colleges and technical state college system that we have in the state of Texas that has been extremely good at creating industry designed programs to meet specific industry specifications for, particularly jobs, giving young adults who, want a high paying job an excellent opportunity. We've been very good at tailoring those programs to meet the needs of industry, working with industry to do that. And that's part of what this strategic plan will do, is it's going to bring industry to the table as well and say, hey, what are you guys going to need? What do those programs need to look like? So that we're not just training nuclear engineers, which we need to do and will continue to do, but it's also, all the way down to, operating the facilities and operating the manufacturing floor.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap too, because the bankers need to probably have standalone nuclear focuses, and the private equity guys, the investors, the lawyers need to have standalone nuclear practices, which you have a lot coming to your event this week.
Yep.
The geologists need to probably start thinking a little bit about uranium extraction, and not just oil and gas extraction.
Yep.
You have all the trade jobs, you have the engineering jobs, and so it's, yeah, I mean, I guess the advice, and maybe you can add on to this, for someone who's 18, 24, 40 years old, 60 years old, wanting to get into the nuclear space would be just find a way in, find a way that aligns with your skill set.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I had anything to add. I completely agree with what you say. I mean, I think going back to what you said at the very beginning, which is that we are in the very, very, very beginning stages of this. And so you have a lot of things going for you. One is probably a massive need, which, what that suggests to me is job security and probably, higher paying salaries. I think it's a pretty cool industry. I think nuclear power is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So it's a growing one. So you can be a part of, this growing movement or regrowing of the industry. When I think those, as a young person coming out of school, that's a lot of good ingredients for, a good recipe.
For sure. And even if you're an electrician who's skilled in that trade, I heard a number, again, this will be directionally correct, around a gigawatt plus size data center build out. And at the peak of construction, they need 1,500 electricians for one project. And seem to be fairly price agnostic as to how much they're paying for those inputs. So, it's an interesting time. And, it's funny because the theme is around a lot of the build out and deployment is around AI. But the flip side of that would be that there's a lot of these jobs that AI can't replace. It probably won't replace anytime soon. So curious your thoughts on that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's, what is the old adage? It's the guy that knows how to, it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's the guy who, manages AI that's going to take your job. And that's not exactly what that saying means, but the flip side of that is, in order to build out the infrastructure, whether it's nuclear or anything else, it's a lot of jobs, construction jobs, electrician jobs. A lot of jobs are going to be needed in order, operator jobs, in order to power the AI that needs to be built. And when you talk about the scale of what needs to happen in AI, I mean, there's a lot of humans that are going to be needed for many, many years, really the rest of our lifetime in order to do that.
Totally agree. Let's talk a little bit about Austin.
All right.
Real quick. Here in Austin for the summit, you've seen companies like Allo Atomics, Last Energy decide Austin for manufacturing. I think there's several others in the space. What's the draw here besides the culture and it being an incredible community? What's the draw to Austin specifically from a nuclear deployment standpoint for these companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a buzz about Austin. I think that's part of it. There's a vibe that people want to be here, and I think it's from a workforce perspective and getting people to coalesce around a single spot. Austin has, if you're a young person, it's got a lot going for it, right? Culturally speaking, it's in Texas. I think that's a big component of everything that we talked about a minute ago in terms of regulatory certainty and frankly workforce supply, workforce training. If you're a business that's in manufacturing and needs a large skilled workforce, that doesn't exist yet, frankly, there's really one state to do it. And I think Texas is the place to do it. I think it's the combination of being in Texas and the great vibe that, Austin has. I don't know if it's weird anymore. I don't know if you can really say keeping it weird anymore, but, young people want to be here. You got the river or the lake, whatever you want to call it. You got the music capital of the world. You got a great university. You got, the political vibe going on behind us.
Building behind us.
Our viewers can't see it, but the governor's mansion right down there. I mean, it's got this weird, there it is. I said it, weird. This great confluence of, the ability to be outdoors. The hill country is beautiful. almost year-round weather, great weather. A few months there in the summer that maybe aren't so great, but combined with university town and a government capital, and those things are in the music capital world. I mean, I think those things combine to give it a very unique sort of distinct vibe that attracts young people. And if I'm a company who wants to attract some of the best and brightest minds in nuclear, then Austin's a good place to put down roots and have them come flocking.
There's a lot going on here.
There is.
And the summit this week, I was so impressed when you sent out the lineup. I went to one of the flagship conferences in Atlanta a few months ago, and comparing the lineups, I mean, you guys have drawn an incredible list of the top players in the space. So congratulations to you and the organization. I know it's still early innings, but what y'all built so far is incredible.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I honestly, I'd like to take all the credit, but I think we're riding the wave of a decision by leadership to put down a marker, and that has gotten a lot of people in the industry interested. A lot of people want to be a part of it now, and I think that's why you're seeing such great attendance and such high level participation from not just companies, but from government and elected officials from here, from DC, regulators. I mean, that type of that energy and that vision and mentality is contagious, and I think that's really the summit is a microcosm of that contagion, all coalescing in one spot for 2 days. So I appreciate you saying it. I wish I could take all the credit for it. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, it's an honor, a privilege to have you here today, and
thanks for having me.
Won't take up much more of your time. I know you have a really busy week ahead of you, but I do want to ask something completely unrelated to nuclear.
Was this in the script?
I always love to ask people, what's something that you do consistently to keep your mind and body sharp, as you're clearly a busy guy and having to operate at a high level regularly?
Even though I might not look like it, I try to exercise every day. Okay. So this morning I got up, a little extra early, just because more compressed morning, and still got my 30 to 45 minute walk, jog in. I'm pretty avid tennis and pickleball player, so that's often how I blow off steam and refresh, and like you said, keep the mind fresh. So
nice.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, one of my
Our listeners want to know what you do to keep your mind sharp.
One of my favorite things to do, actually, and I try to do it not every day, because every day would be overdoing it, but I'm a big hot-cold therapy fan.
Oh, yeah.
So I love to spend time in
it's the cold
sauna and cold plunge
combo that.
Yeah. Well, it's good. If you get into box breathing and really breathe in the right way, you kind of forget about the cold. So I love to do a rotation of going from the sauna into the cold plunge, back into the sauna, and the cold plunge is something I try to do 2 or 3 times a week, and that really helps clear my mind. So
I've heard great things. Maybe one of these days I'll have the courage to do the cold plunge.
A cold plunge at the summit next year, maybe.
There you go. Hey, you guys can sponsor the cold plunge booth. We can throw bean bags and drop people in the cold plunge or something like that.
Sign us up. That'll be fun. Well, it's been fun, Reed. Thanks so much.
Likewise.
And good luck this week.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the show. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and stay tuned to continue to gain insights on how to invest in nuclear energy.